Hi, baddies. Welcome back to another episode of Tara's Baddies Club. I'm really excited for today's guest. She was supposed to be on Survivor Squad, but she's going to be on my show now, and I'm really excited to have her. This episode, just a little bit of a trigger warning. We're going to talk about SA, and we are going to talk about narcissism and also manipulation and also ghost, if that's something that kind of scares you in a sense. Kiersten is a medium and she's also a survivor. She was also on Shark Tank. She really connected with my mom because they were on Dr. Ramani's podcast, Navigating Narcissism, and that's before I was on her podcast as well. So I really am excited to meet Kiersten on this episode because we have been friends, connected through our family. My mom knows her, and it's just a big family, especially when you know Dr. Ramani. She's amazing and definitely someone that you should check out on narcissism if you need more information on that. So we're going to get into today's episode. Trigger warning, we're going to be talking about things that might be scary. So like SA and other stuff if I haven't mentioned it already. And I also am going to be at True Crime Paranormal Festival in July, so check me out there. Use code TARA for your discount. And then I'll also tell you a little bit more surprises at the end. So let's get into today's episode. Hi, Kirsten. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you because we recorded for Survivor Squad. That episode didn't come out, and maybe for right reasons because it's meant to be girl energy.
I love it, and I feel the same way, honestly. Tara, this is such a joy. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, thank you. Why don't you start to share a little bit about who you are, and then we'll get into your story.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm 50 this year, just turned 50. And, my background is actually in furniture design and carpentry. I built an entrepreneurship. I'm an entrepreneur, I guess. I built a company out of our garage, and I was able to go on Shark Tank. And so that's kind of like my corporate history. I have a whole other story behind me, which has more to do with what we've talked about before, which was my heightened intuition. I'm a medium, and I work mostly with detectives and law enforcement working on cold cases, and many of them involving children. I'm also a survivor of narcissistic abuse and childhood sexual abuse. So those two things kind of created this incredibly awful juncture in my life when I was 40. And I survived a 3-year relationship with a narcissistic abuser. I talk a lot about how all of that collided in terms of intuition, and falling into a relationship that so many of us fall into without knowing it, without seeing what's happening. Even when we're intuitive and tapped into our intuition for others, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're listening to your own intuitive sense. And so I talk a lot about that because had I been really, really tapped into my own intuition, maybe I would have seen the signs, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, but I feel like no matter what, you could be blinded by everything. And when you come into these toxic relationships, there's the oxytocin, there's the charming, like this person, we'll get more into your story, but they kind of pick you out in a sense.
Yeah, they do, and I think that I was so naive. I was 40 years old. I was super naive. My husband and I were having a lot of issues, and we weren't really dealing with it. I will upfront say I will always forever and ever and ever regret that I went down the rabbit hole with someone. I did not intend to jump out of my marriage. I did not intend to meet this man. But when I was 40, he targeted me. And I just didn't realize that's what was happening. But that's exactly what was happening. And it was at a really tough time in my life. And I had always hoped that if I understood, like looking back now, if I had understood more about the subconscious, the way it works, the way childhood wounding works, and how it, how you sort of end up being attracted in a strange way to someone who's similar to the person who abused you as a child. Like, I didn't know any of that, So those are the things that, I'm really passionate about, and I know we've talked about before. But I agree. I think anyone can be blindsided by a narcissist. Anyone. It doesn't matter your intelligence level, your socioeconomic level, nothing. It just does not matter. I thought I was keenly aware and intuitive and smart and had it together. And I still fell right down the rabbit hole.
Now, how did you first meet this person? And then I think we'll lead into your story of intuition, because it's fun to hear a little bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I know it's interesting. My story has like 3 different sections. But when I met Tony, and I wrote a book called Little Voices, and his name is Tony in the book. I met Tony and I was 40, turning 40. And I had been through a lot of ups and downs, like I mentioned. I was in an 18-year marriage at the time. Spoiler alert, also, we're back together and have been for years. So, we had a 3-year separation when I was with Tony. I met him through mutual friends. And I didn't meet him on a dating site or anything like that. Like I said, this was not something I had planned. I met him when I had flown down to North Carolina to a show called High Point. And High Point is just an international trade show for anyone in home furnishings. I was hired by Stanley Furniture to be their spokesperson. I get off the plane and find out that I've lost my job and my licensing deal. And my husband at the time had also lost his job. So, I was in a pit of despair when I got there. And that's the perfect time for somebody who wants to kind of come in and take advantage to do that. So I met him through friends. I thought, because I met him through friends, friends that I trusted, that I could trust him. And, that piece, it was very kind of slow in the first few days. And he was pretty much just saying, hey, I want to help you however I can. He touted himself as an international furniture designer. And I thought, wow, okay. I mean, I'm a mom in a garage. Like, this is great that this guy wants to help me. Little did I know he wanted to do more than that in the beginning. So, that was really how I met him. I met him in a horrible time of my life. And I trusted him without really doing any due diligence.
I feel like the narcissists, they're also so good at presenting themselves as somebody. I feel like their rates are always higher than others. They're always like the top of the line. They're, and the dogs.
It's okay. They're so sweet.
Yeah, and if you guys don't know, I have foster puppies right now, and that's why they're interrupting it. But, they're so good at putting on this persona of I'm somebody. And was that what Tony was doing in a sense?
Oh, absolutely. And, other people that I knew and trusted were like, oh, he's a great guy. Yeah, he's really successful. He's worked all over the world. If he was wanting to do a kid's line of furniture with you, then that's such a great thing. So it wasn't as if I was just meeting him and thinking, oh, okay, well, he seems great on paper. I was literally hearing it from other people as well. So you're right. They do that, and they appear larger than life is what I have endured and learned through my journey.
And, something else that I think is interesting, that is kind of like the meet cute, and you went through something that was really hard. You just got off. You were in like such a vulnerable state with getting that news. Then you go into this, and then he's starting to kind of become the savior in a sense.
1,000%. He was doing things that, I had sort of been holding up the world for 18 years. And my husband has, admitted, he said, and he's such a beautiful person and he's grown and healed through all of this too. But, he said, Kiersten, I was like the Peter Pan syndrome. I was running around, having fun, flying here, flying there, and you were taking care of everything. And of course, that's not balance. That can't happen in a marriage. I, unfortunately, was just not talking about it. I was, a lot of my pent up resentment was just kept inside. And, that's sort of where where I was, right before I met him. The other thing I wanted to mention is right before I met Tony, I had also finally come to the realization that I had been sexually abused as a child. And I am one of those few, or many, depending on how you look at repressed memories, but I am one of those people who repressed memories until I was 36. My journey outside of Tony, is a movie in itself, because it wasn't as if I had learned about intuition and learned about, my abuse in an ordinary way. I wasn't in a therapy office. I was literally hit over the head. And I was starting to see and hear children in spirit when I was 36. And I'm sorry, I messed that up. I was around 39 when it came to me that I was actually sexually abused. The thing about the kids coming to me to help me understand this, and I'm a very scientific person. I believe in empirical research. I grew up in Ohio. My background is not woo-woo at all. So my first thought when all of this started happening was, oh my God, I'm losing my mind. Is my husband going to put me in a mental institution? Is this the polyurethane I've been breathing all these years building furniture? Like, what is it? But I came to learn through validation with others by stepping out and starting to trust my intuition and starting to trust the messages that it was real. And many of those kids had been sexually abused or murdered by sexual predators. So, it was diving into my intuition and learning to hone that, that helped me understand that when I started to see flashbacks of my own abuse and I started to put all of those clues together from my own life, that I could trust it, and that's what's so interesting, I think, too, about my story. It's kind of juxtaposed, right? So I have all of this intuition. I'm working with cops. I have all these kids that are coming around. I'm starting to notice there's a pattern here. There's a theme here, yet I still went down the rabbit hole because it's so hard to trust our own intuition, right? And that's the piece that is critical, I think.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really interesting how you started to get those visions too. And that is such a major component, I think, to your story as well, is having those realizations that you were sexually abused as a child, because that's a lot to handle and process, and even puts you in more of a vulnerable state. And I know that you were on Ramani's podcast as well.
Yeah.
And I think she pointed out that like you being in that vulnerable state also was,
Absolutely. Honestly, like I said, I had no plans of, going down the rabbit hole with anybody. Like, yes, there were things in my marriage, but that was not what I was setting out to do. I was literally flying in for a work event. But I also didn't understand how much healing needs to happen when you are a childhood sexual abuse survivor. So I had just come to that realization. I thought to myself, oh, I got this. I'm going to go to therapy. Check. And I would sit there and I would talk to the therapist. And I'm like, yeah, I feel a little bit better. Okay. But I felt so removed. And that's what was fascinating about this whole process was, through the abuse. So I lived 3 years of abuse with Tony. I was starting to actually get more in touch with little Kiersten, because little Kiersten was the one who was screaming. Initially, little Kiersten was the one who was, as my good friend says, driving the bus. And so that subconscious wounding that, she endured because she's the one who went through all of this, that was what was drawing me to him. Because if I look at my uncle, who was the one who raped me when I was between the ages of 3 and 6, and I look at Tony, they're identical people. But I didn't see that with my conscious brain. So, that was what was so interesting. It felt like everything in me was being drawn to him in a way that almost like I couldn't stop. Then I started to get the backpedaling, and I was starting to... I was literally starting to get like vibrational bumps on my hip whenever he would start to yell at me. And it was on my right hip. And all of that stopped when I finally escaped the abuse. But it was as if she was saying, and my everything in me, my intuition was saying, this is so wrong. Everything about this is wrong. You know that you have to get out of this.
Wow. I feel like it's really the hips that tell you, especially
Yes.
with the trauma too.
It is. Thank you for saying that. And you're probably the first person in all of the podcasts I've done since Little Voices has come out to recognize that. So I appreciate that so much. And I know with your expertise and your history and your knowledge, it's so true. And I didn't pick up on that, which is funny, right? For someone, again, who's so intuitive. But it became so apparent that it was as if I couldn't ignore it. And that was part of what I kind of likened to, her screaming and saying, not again, not again. So it really took me standing up to his abuse for me to heal little Kiersten, because I was standing up for her. And I didn't realize that I needed to do that.
Yeah. Now, you meet him at this conference, and how were other ways that he kind of lured you in after the first initial meet?
Sure. So, he kind of has this standard MO like we all talk about, right? It's almost as if they're given a playbook from the beginning, like at birth. Like, here's your handbook. Here's how you're going to do this. So very flattering, definitely put me on a pedestal. I can remember about 4 months in, he said something to me about my eye contact with other men. We were walking around another trade show together at this point, and he said, Kirsten, do you know that you have a lot of eye contact with other men? And I was like, wow, no, I don't. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, is that a bad thing? Like, I was always taught by my parents to look people in the eye. And so if we're passing someone, that's what I'm going to do. Right. So I just took a very kind of clinical approach to it. And then he said it again, and it was a little more subtle the second time. It was an interesting thing to watch him do this and weave. And he would take, it would be days before it would come up again. But he basically was able to groom me and condition me in so many ways that I did not see coming. So by the end, towards the end of our relationship, I mean, I would look down when I was walking through a mall or places, because I didn't want him to see that, if I accidentally glanced up, because that would happen too. And then I would get yelled at. So, these are things that Kirsten the carpenter, Kirsten the feminist, Kirsten the activist, like those things don't jive with what happened, with who I was when I was with him, because I would never put up with that. That was what was also so interesting, was that process of grooming. There was financial abuse. Of course, he was, he was triangulating, as they say in these circles, where there was always some other woman, and it could be so benign, like, oh, I talked to her. She's amazing. Yeah, we had a really great talk. Well, yeah, she kind of had a crush on me before, or, he would say something that I would be like, oh, well, that's understandable. I'm not a jealous person. So it didn't ring jealous with me. So he would just keep going. And there would be more and more and more, to the point where it was really hard to know what was real and what wasn't real.
Yeah, and other ways I think is interesting that he kind of grabbed onto you and sucked you in is that he really lured you in with business. And didn't he have like all these business ideas for you and everything?
Yeah, I mean, that's how it started. Again, we were just business associates, and he was friends with friends of mine in the industry. So he saw a way to capitalize on the type of exposure I was getting at the time, because I had landed a big licensing deal and a spokesperson deal. And, I didn't see that at all. And eventually he turned it around and kind of made it like, well, we can do Mod Mom furniture later. Why don't we focus on these designs that are mine? When I look back on it, I just kind of like, oh my gosh, Kirsten, how in the world did you not see any of this? But you don't, so many of us don't see it. And I think that's hard, right? As survivors, because there's so much shame out there. People, throwing that at us. But I didn't see it. And I'll fully admit it.
Well, when you're in it, you're in it. And you have all this oxytocin being thrown at
Mm-hmm.
you. You are kind of maybe addicted to the highs and lows of things. Like,
Yeah.
there's like always something happening, and maybe the relationship's so exciting at first. And that's
Mm.
like kind of part of the love bombing you. And so that's the high to like come from. And then you're like, oh, all these bad things happen, but he's doing this for me. He's doing that for me. And I should be grateful because he's putting in a lot of effort into our business and stuff. And
Yes.
he's trying to make that happen. So I need to have leniency with other things.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I did. I would think, well, maybe, he's in a bad mood. It's fine. He's just in a bad mood. Um, okay, well, that was true because we can all be in bad moods. But, what I saw was really, it really looked like, let me build her up and then cut her down a little bit, build her up again, cut her down a little bit more, build her up again, to the point when I finally got out of it. I saw a therapist, I saw a psychologist, I saw a hypnotherapist. I was so turned around and I didn't know who I was. And I remember my husband saying at the time, Kiersten, like, please, like, it's almost as if I don't know who you are, and you don't know who you are, but I know who you are. I know she's still in there. And that was, incredible to see people who knew me from before, have just were anguished about it, trying to figure out how do we help her, because she's still trying to figure out how did this happen, how do I heal, what's the key here. And to be honest with you, it wasn't until I heard about the topic of wounded attachment, which is in psychology circles, that the light bulb went off for me. Because at that point, I finally looked back and went, oh my gosh, he is exactly my uncle. And this is that had to be it, and here I thought I was healed and healing and, but of course I was, but I would like to, I tell my story because I don't want people to maybe stay in it as long, as I did. I would love for people to be able to trust their own intuition and those gut feelings and the kick in the gut and, all those things that we get subtly, and trust that from the very beginning. Because I could have shortened it. I know I could have.
Yeah. And what were some of those things that you felt like you should have had that gut reaction to, but you kind of, I feel like we all do this. We all brush it
Right.
under the rug, or we all make excuses, or we don't really make excuses, but we like, okay, our trauma was so much.
Mm-hmm.
How do we find that normal? And is this normal?
Right, right. Well, I think that's what's so hard about being conditioned, which is exactly what happens in these relationships, right? Because you're given all of these things that feel good. And then you're given the one little thing. And it was always the one little thing. Like, for example, we were in New York City. I was actually meeting for the first time with Detective Mark Pucci, and he and I founded a nonprofit together where we help other crime victims and families. I work as a volunteer medium, and he's a boots on the ground detective. So it's pretty awesome. But first time I met him, it was 2014, 10 years ago. Tony was with me. We're in New York City. We meet in a diner. Mark was wonderful. He's a wonderful human being. And we compared notes on a case that I had been working on from a mediumship side in Flagstaff, and he was in New York, and everything matched, right? So I'm kind of on this like, wow. First of all, I did not grow up with mediumship abilities. All of that just hit me over the head when I was 36. So I'm in that state of, I can't believe this is real, and that he's validating this, and that he believes that this is helpful, Like, I was feeling very grateful that I took the risk to come out as a medium, because I truly, I was very scared to do that. It took me a while. He, however, Tony, as we leave the meeting, says to me, Mark's a nice guy, but I think he just wants to sleep with you. And so, he planted these seeds, which I knew were not true. I knew that was not what I was feeling in my own intuition, and even just from Mark and his reaction, and what I was hearing from the other side. But he planted that. And I got this huge kick in the gut feeling right as he said it. And then he smartly, as we kept walking down the New York street, hon, that was amazing. You're so great. I mean, I can't believe that you're helping families like this. Like, this is so amazing of you to be able, so he rebounded. He planted the seed and then he rebounded. And then for 3 years, he would continue to bring it up at different intervals. So, not only was he triangulating with other women and bringing other women in, he was also trying to throw shade, on other people who happen to be men in my life, in one partnership, a form or another.
Well, I think it's also interesting because he's also doing the negging, which is like the backhanded compliment where he's like, oh, honey, you were great. But by the way, he's also into you.
Yeah.
And I meant, Mark, he's not into you.
No, I mean, we could not have more brother and sister vibe, and even Scott, my husband, I mean, they're like brothers too. Like that is, we're like family. And it is very true. Like but he did a really good job of doing that and really making me question things. And I think that's the biggest deal really throughout all of it. If I were to put it together, the kick in the gut feeling that I would have anytime he would sort of throw one of those bombs, but then recover well, I should have listened to that. I should have paid attention to that. And I didn't. I kept pushing it away.
Shoulda, coulda, woulda,
Right? Right.
I mean, we all have lessons, I think, that we need to learn too in this life. And I think that that's a part of the lesson, even though it's unfortunate you went through that and had that experience.
Thank you. And what's so interesting about this, so I haven't even really touched on the children. So, the children in spirit, and it's mostly kids that I channel throughout that relationship. I had been channeling them for about 2 years. I still work with a lot of the same families even, and I pass messages when they come through. But those kids were around me the whole time. There were several of them who came in and warned me. And it was around 6 months in that I heard the first warning, which was, this is not what it seems. But I have to look at it. If we look at Earth as Earth school, and we're souls living in these bodies, I do think that, like you said, there are lessons. There are things that we've come to do and heal and learn and grow and experience as a soul. So they couldn't necessarily interfere in that at that point. And free will, of course, is ours. So my free will thought, well, I don't know what that means. And then I just brushed it aside. By the end, several of the children were literally coaching me. Get the restraining order now. Go. He knows it's from you. Call the cops now. There were very pointed directions towards the end because I finally knew what I was living in. But what they have said afterwards in the aftermath, once I got through it, one of the kids in spirit, he was actually 19, so he's not necessarily a kid, but he was a old teen, I guess. He died at 19 of a heroin overdose. And he said to me along the journey, don't make him your heroine. He had passed away after he and his girlfriend, whom he had broken up with and then got back together with, she was also doing heroin. He had been clean for a while. And that first hit again with her is what took him out. So, he was saying those things to me. He was also saying in the very end, you couldn't have avoided this. And it's hard to wrap my head around as a human being, that maybe there are some things in our lives that we are meant to go through. I don't have all the answers by any means, and I could get to the other side and think, wow, that I really screwed that up. But I think from what I've learned just as a medium, there's some truth to that. We have control in some ways, but we also, we have control into, how long we stay in it, what we do when we meet that person. But yeah, so he did say that. He said I couldn't have avoided him.
Yeah. And what were some of the things that kind of made him a narcissist in a sense, or made him this person? Because I feel like also the kids kind of went away during that point, did they?
Yeah, so there were a couple of them, like they used to flank me all the time, and people in other mediums would say you've just like there's a line behind you, and I'd be like, I know, but there were a core 3 or 4 that were actually kind of my guides helping me through this. So a lot of the other casework went away, the external stuff, but those kids that were helping me through it, knowing that I wasn't understanding it and trying to get me to understand it, they were there. But the narcissist, for him, one of the things that I found out afterwards is that during the time he was targeting me, he was also targeting 10 other women. To be honest with you, I don't know how anyone keeps that going, especially in the day and age of Facebook and Instagram. But he was seeing multiple people. It was all the same lines. At the time, I didn't really know the term of twin soul. He used that quite a bit. He kind of, he talked my language to some degree in woo-woo. And kind of understanding, from that aspect. He molded himself to be who he knew I needed and really wanted at that point. So when, that was absolutely the basis, I think for everything. But yeah, he financially devastated quite a few women. I became vocal about it. I thought the only way I'm going to get through this, I've always been pretty open about my life, to my detriment many times, but I decided, you know what, I wish that there was a book out there that would have helped me had I been going through both of these things, honestly, at the same time, whether it's life after death and understanding all of that or narcissistic abuse. And I thought, I'm just going to put it all out there. So when I first started writing about it prior to the book, all of these women from around the world wrote to me and they said, he did this to me. And I moved out of the country. It was so bad. I come to find out so much information. There's a lot of it I can't even really talk about, but I do know that he ended up basically grooming a 15-year-old when he was in his 40s. And that was happening right before I met him. So, those types of things, like if we put it all together in a circle, I was a childhood sexual abuse survivor who works on cases, as a medium with children who have been abused or killed by predators, who fell in love with a predator. And, that's why I wanted to write this book, because I think there's so much that we don't understand. We walk around thinking that we have it all together. We know, like I'm making good decisions. Not understanding the power of the subconscious.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. You get to a certain point, you're like, I'm an adult. I make my own money. Mm-hmm. I have kids. They're coming along.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah. Looking back now, like I said, I'm 50 now, so it feels like a lifetime ago. But looking back now, it really feels like I was a totally different person. And I was. To be honest with you, I was, because it was the first time that little Kiersten had a voice and was really finally coming to the forefront, because I understood what she went through. I had to have vaginal surgery when I was 19. I'd never put that together with anything. I just thought, well, that was congenital. That's why I had to have that. I wasn't thinking, oh, this is scar tissue. I wasn't putting any of those dots together. I was terribly shy, terribly modest. The first time I was intimate, even with my husband, I just sort of laid there, because that's the subconscious, right? Like it drives 80% of our behavior. And if you have a wound like childhood sexual abuse in your background and you have not healed that and you have not done the work, the subconscious healing work to do that, this is what happens. That's kind of what I wanted to say. Like, this is, this can happen to you. And it happened to me.
Yeah. Now, how have you healed in a sense? I know that sometimes I'm like, there'll be days that you're not like completely healed, but how have you done that healing work?
Thank you for asking that. And it's a long journey, and I don't know if I'll ever fully be healed, to be honest with you, from both abuses. But I do know that, I don't have the vibrational hits on my hip anymore. I don't have the knee jerk reactions to things, where I'm holding my breath. It'll surprise me, though, I will say, out of the blue. Like, I'll give you an example. My husband and I were out for dinner. This was a few years ago, but we went into the restaurant. I chose to sit so that I was not facing the door. Now, I did this not consciously. I wasn't thinking consciously I'm going to choose that seat. I just did it. And then he sat across from me. And the minute I did it, I looked back at the door and I made the connection. I went, oh my God, I'm still doing this. Because prior in the relationship with Tony, if I was sitting and the door was in front of me, and anytime the door would open, the light would hit my eye. So naturally, as a human being, you look up, right? Because it's blinding you. So I looked up and he said, there you are again, looking at all the men coming in. He made it about other people and me not being present with him. So it was another thing that I had to check off, on my, like, when you walk, look down. When you sit in a restaurant, sit so you're not facing the door. So I was doing those things subconsciously. I don't do that anymore, thank goodness. But I felt like making the connection between those two things and actually recognizing it was the first step. I had been in talk therapy for about 2 years. Absolutely love my therapist. She's amazing. And my psychologist was incredible. I have found for myself that to heal the subconscious, I needed things like hypnotherapy, tapping, EMDR therapy, things that truly get to that. And I know you know a lot about this, get to the subconscious to heal that, because I could talk my way through it all day long, but it wasn't necessarily making a dent on that end. I did a lot of work too, just saying to little Kirsten, I've got you. You're safe now. You're part of me. Now I'm gonna cry. Apparently I'm still not healed. I tried to reparent her in a way, to say that's not happening again, So those are the things that helped me the most, really were the subconscious healing tools.
I love that. And I feel like that's the perfect note to end on for this episode. And then we'll do a little bit for the Patreon. We'll get into your story about how you came to see all these children.
Sure. That sounds great.
But for the ones that are dropping off here, where can we find you on social media? Where can we find Little Voices, everything?
Oh, thank you. So you can find me at KierstenHathcock.com, and Little Voices is out wherever you buy books or audiobooks. I'd be honored if you, took a look at it. And if you've been through something like this, if you've been in an abusive relationship, it might really, it might resonate with you and hopefully help you.
Yes, and I have really enjoyed the book. I'm actually still not finished, but I think there's a reason why, because things finish at certain times for me. And I think I need your story in my life right now. Yeah. So I am, and I think you could probably see it somewhere. It's on the shelf though.
Oh yeah, that's okay. I know it's over here somewhere, and I didn't find mine either, but there we go. I found it. Yes, Little Voices.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Tara.
Of course. Yeah. So check out Little Voices, everyone, and we'll continue on for the Patreon part. Thank you for listening to today's episode with Kiersten. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you learned a little bit about narcissistic abuse. Check out her book, Little Voices, and also just some things that are coming up for trauma. I have my 5-week Moving Past Trauma workshop. We're going to be learning about the nervous system, learning about your triggers, and learning how to navigate your triggers in life, and having some cool tools to kind of help you. So I'm really excited for that. That's starting in August. And then also I have my retreat in Sedona coming up in September. So all of that's in the links in the bios. And then something I've been doing lately that I'm really excited about is I've been trying out ClassPass. So if you want to try out ClassPass, that's something that I tried out. I got a free week. I literally tried a week free of classes, and I'm really thankful for that, because I was actually able to go to my yoga place and get a free class there when that doesn't usually happen. So check out ClassPass. I have a link for you in my show notes for 20 credits. Use that link, and that also helps get me points towards my yoga. So until next time, I'm Tara Newell, and this is Tara's Baddies Club. Bye.